Being a cop in a small town in Minnesota probably isn't the most exciting career there is, but it's not bad either. It's actually a relatively peaceful and safe line of work compared to being in law enforcement in one of the big cities, New York or LA for instance, where the action is. There's only around 10,000 people in the town where I live. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of open farmland. And the only real crime that ever occurs is pretty minor stuff. The occasional rowdy rednecks getting into a fist fight at one of the three bars downtown, teenage vandals, petty theft, the odd drunk driver, a case of disorderly conduct here and there, the rare breaking and entering, that sort of thing. The only real serious stuff I've ever had to deal with is a couple cases of domestic violence and assault and battery, but even that's pretty typical, I guess, and it doesn't happen very often. Well, that's not entirely true. There was one case that still haunts me, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Like I was saying, I live in a pretty peaceful little town. Boring, some would even say. The kind of rural, out-of-the-way farming community you've probably driven through on the highway yourself on the way to someplace more interesting, without as much as a second thought or a glance back. The kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary ever happens, you probably thought. And for the most part, you'd be right. But there's one case I can't get out of my mind. One case that still makes my blood run cold whenever I think about it. One case I can't explain, no matter how hard I try to rationalize it to myself. What happened to the old Garrity woman 7 years ago? I've been a police officer for 5 years when it happened in the early spring of 14. There were only 5 cops on the entire town police force. Me, my partner Jerry, Pete, and Vance, who both worked the night patrol, and a police chief. Plus Karen, an older woman who was a retired librarian and worked part-time as the dispatcher. The police department was located in the town municipal building and consisted of 2 offices, one for the chief and one for the rest of us to share, and 3 jail cells in the rear, and the 3 of them were never all occupied at the same time. It was an overcast, rainy afternoon in late March, early April. Me and Jerry were in our cruiser on a routine patrol around town when Karen's voice came over the radio, telling us there was a possible 1082 in progress at the Garrity house on Turner Road. For those of you who aren't in the know, a 1082 is police code for a burglary. We acknowledged, then changed directions, heading for the Garrity home. I wasn't unduly concerned about the call. I already had a pretty good idea who had made it. Eileen Garrity was an elderly widow who lived in a run-down farmhouse on the outskirts of town. She was probably around 65 or 70 years old and had lived alone since her husband had died of a stroke 3 years before. They had 2 adult children, but they both lived out of town and never visited her. Since her husband's death, she developed something of a reputation for being eccentric, to put it nicely, or crazy, to put it not so nicely. She was a shut-in who rarely left her home and had her groceries delivered once a week. Basically a crazy cat lady minus the cats. The reason she was considered crazy was because she'd become pretty flaky and paranoid since being widowed, and had called the police department on multiple occasions for everything from hearing intruders moving around in her attic to seeing UFOs in her cornfield. There were probably at least a dozen others, too. All her calls turned out to be false alarms, of course. The burglars she claimed were hiding in her attic turned out to be a pair of raccoons that had slipped in under the roof, and the UFOs were probably just jets flying overhead from the National Guard base 50 miles west. Me and Jerry and Pete and Vance had all visited her home before, during our respective shifts. We never got frustrated with her or gave her a hard time about it, and we usually indulged her, inspecting her house and property to calm her nerves. She'd relax, thank us we'd leave, and the process would repeat itself in a couple weeks or a couple months. Honestly, our infrequent trips to her house were probably the only real highlight of what was a rather dull and unexciting job. When we told the chief about Mrs. Garrity's latest emergency, Bigfoot was sneaking around her yard, or there was a giant anaconda lurking in the basement, he would just shake his head sadly when Vance and Pete were the ones who had to deal with her. They'd tell us all about her most recent ordeal when me and Jerry saw them at the end of their shifts and the start of ours. They'd usually smirk in a mean-spirited way, and Pete would twirl his finger next to his temple before they left. Jerry and I just felt sorry for the old woman. It couldn't have been easy for her, a frail, nervous, lonely woman living all alone in that old, crumbling house with no friends or close family. I suspected she might be eating senile. or maybe entering the early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia. We worried about her living there by herself, almost a mile from the nearest neighbor. If her health suddenly turned bad, or she had an accident and couldn't call for help, well, there wasn't really much we could do about it. A couple times, I looked up the numbers of her daughters and son, and I tried calling them about possibly placing her in an assisted living home or a mental health facility. But the one time I managed to reach her son, as I was explaining his mother's situation to him, he interrupted me by telling me he was too busy at the moment and would call me back, then abruptly ended the call. He never did call me back. From then on, they always happened to be unavailable and never answered any of the voicemail messages I left them. So Jerry and I turned on to Turner Road and drove up to Mrs. Garrity's house on the gray, rainy late spring day, certain that the old woman was just overreacting yet again to something relatively minor, and her imagination was just playing tricks on her. She was waiting for us outside on her porch when we pulled to a stop. I'll never forget how she looked. It shocked me. She'd already been a thin, frail woman the other times we'd been out there, but we hadn't seen her in probably a couple months since her last false emergency, and she'd changed drastically since then. Now she was gaunt, almost emaciated, her cheeks hollow and dark rings around her bloodshot, sunken eyes. Her gray hair was tangled and didn't look like it had been washed in days, maybe weeks. And the dress she was wearing was wrinkled and dirty. Her physical appearance was alarming enough, but there was also something about the way she was staring at both of us, with those dark, dull eyes that seemed to look at us, through us, and past us all at once. It reminded me of old photos I'd seen of American soldiers in Vietnam. The blank, expressionless, shell-shocked look of someone who'd been through more horror than any ordinary person should have to endure. Me and Jerry exchanged a shocked look, then got out and approached the old woman. "What seems to be the trouble, Mrs. Garrity?" Jerry asked her amiably, trying to keep his voice nonchalant. "There's something in my house," she told us in a flat, toneless voice. She was shaking slightly, a woman on the verge of total physical and mental exhaustion. The way she phrased it, "not someone but something," made me raise my eyebrow. "Well, you just wait here and we'll go have a look and make sure it's safe, okay?" I told her, try not to sound too patronizing. I looked at Jerry and nodded. We drew our pistols and stepped past Mrs. Garrity, cautiously entering the house. We did a routine sweep of the first floor, guns leveled, then headed upstairs. It only took about 5 minutes to check out the house. We'd done it so many times before we had the layout down pat, and there was no sign of any intruders or evidence of a breaking and entering. But I saw plenty of other things that disturbed me deeply. For one thing, the place was a total mess. The house was already pretty decrepit, but Mrs. Garrity had still taken pride at how clean she kept it, and it always had been spick and span on our earlier visits. Now dirty dishes were stacked high in the kitchen sink, the counters were dirty, and trash and dirty laundry littered the floors. I also noticed that Mrs. Garrity's pillow and blankets were lying rumpled on the couch in the living room. The surface of the coffee table in front of it was cluttered with half-drunk cups of coffee, open containers of food, a Bible, and a rosary. It looked like she'd been eating and sleeping in the living room for some time. When we went upstairs, sure enough, the bed in Mrs. Garrity's room was bare, and the room itself looked like it had been vacant for quite a while. There was also something in the living room that really alarmed me. Leaning in one corner was an old double-barreled shotgun that had probably belonged to her late husband. Jerry picked it up, broke it open, and found 2 spent shells in the chamber. He took one out, sniffed it, then told me the gun had been fired very recently. We also discovered something else bizarre. All the mirrors in Mrs. Garrity's house had been shattered, and every closet door had been boarded shut. The one in the front hall on the first floor had a huge hole blasted in the center of it, smaller holes pitting the splintered wood around it. It didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to deduce that Mrs. Garrity had fired her husband's shotgun into that door. But why? What the hell had happened here? Jerry shot me a perplexed, questioning look. I shrugged, clueless and equally bewildered. Finishing with our inspection of the house, we put away our pistols and turned around to go back outside. Mrs. Garrity was standing in a room behind us, staring at us with that unnerving, blank expression. Both of us almost jumped a foot in the air, startled. Neither of us had seen her enter. Jerry regained his composure and flashed her a fake, reassuring smile. "Well, we don't see any sign of him, Mrs. Garrity. He must have slipped out the back. You're safe now." She didn't relax or appear relieved, like she had the countless other times we humored her. Her face seemed to twitch, and some new look dawned in her eyes. It took me a moment to identify it. It was a look of pure, hopeless doom mixed with terror. "No," she said in that same odd, listless, flat voice. "I'm not safe. It's still here. It's hiding. That's why you couldn't find it. And after you leave, it'll come back for me." Then she began to quiver. She started to cry with total despair, breaking down into hysterical sobs that racked her whole body. Jerry and I looked at each other, concerned. We went to the old woman and comforted her as best as we could, guiding her over to the couch and sitting her down with us on either side of her, coaxing her gently back to a state of calm. After she had herself back under control, we asked her to explain what had happened. She was quiet for a few moments, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. As we listened to her story, my body temperature seemed to gradually drop, and I felt a chill. Several times I made eye contact with Jerry, and his expression was a mirror of my own. Disbelief and fear. "It started about a month ago," she began. "That's when I first heard the scratching at my closet door. A soft, slow, steady scratching that seemed to come from inside her bedroom closet at night. At first, she'd assumed it was probably a mouse or some other small animal, except the scratching seemed to come from too high up to be the work of a mouse. Whenever she opened the closet door, always after the scratching had ceased, there'd been nothing there. Several times, she'd started to open the closet door while the scratching was in progress to get to the bottom of it once and for all. But each time she grasped the knob, she'd been overwhelmed with a sudden, irrational sense of unease and had been unable to do it. The scratching sounded too deliberate, too gentle, too deceptively harmless, as if something was trying to lure her into opening the closet door. To be safe, she'd started locking her closet door every night. Over the next several days, the scratching had gotten louder and more intense, as if something was trying to tunnel its way through the wood. One day, she opened her closet door and found claw marks on the other side. Claw marks that were 6 feet off the ground. Claw marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. The horror had really started for Mrs. Garrison about a week after she'd first heard the scratching sounds one night. She'd awoken to a voice softly calling for her, a voice that seemed to be coming from the locked closet door. She was bewildered, even more so because she recognized that voice. It belonged to Bill, her dead husband. Bill's voice had pleaded for her too, to open the closet door, telling her that God had sent him down to take her up to heaven, where they could be together again and young like they'd used to be forever. At this point, Jerry had looked at me wide-eyed from the other side of the couch. "Then what happened?" I prodded her gently. "I thought I was dreaming, Mrs. Garrity said. I thought it had to be a dream. Poor Bill had been gone for 3 years, and since I was having a dream, I didn't see any harm in doing what he was asking me to. I got out of bed and went to the closet. I reached for the lock, but then I stopped. Something didn't seem right. It was Bill's voice, and it seemed perfectly normal, but somehow it was wrong too. The way he was talking, it wasn't like how Bill used to talk. It was like a stranger was using Bill's voice, trying to trick me into opening the closet door. That doesn't make much sense, does it? Actually, nothing she was telling us made sense. But we just asked her to continue telling her story. Bill, or whoever or whatever was using his voice, had continued to beg her to unlock the closet. When she refused, the voice had changed, becoming harsh and belligerent. It had angrily demanded she open that door, and when she'd still refused, it had begun to shout at her, using profanity and making obscene threats. Things Bill never would have said to her while he was alive, she said, before beginning to pound violently on the door. The voice had begun to change, no longer sounding like her late husband's. It had become deeper and distorted until it didn't sound human. In terror, she fled her bedroom and spent the night on the couch downstairs. Eventually, the pounding and the threats had stopped. Mrs. Garrity, Jerry politely interrupted her at this point. Why didn't you call us at the police station when this happened? She was silent for a moment. Then a small, bitter smile formed on her lips. I thought you thought I was just imagining it. I know people in town think I'm a crazy old lady, and I've had you all out here so many times before for things that turned out to be nothing. I thought maybe it was all in my head, and I didn't want to bother you about it. Things had escalated pretty quickly from there. The pounding and threats had continued every night. She'd been too scared to sleep in her bedroom and had started sleeping on the living room couch. Then one night, the pounding had begun, not just on her bedroom closet door, but all the closet doors in the house, all at the same time, like there were people in all of them trying to get out all at once, she told us. But it was the same voice in every closet, the same horrible voice. In fear, she nailed all the closet doors shut to keep the thing, whatever it was, from coming out to get her. Then, about 2 weeks ago, something even more terrifying had happened. She'd been in her bathroom and was washing her hands in the sink when she looked up into the mirror. Here, she paused in her story. "What did you see?" Jerry asked her. "I saw it," she said in a choked whimper. "I saw its face instead of my own. It was wearing a black robe with a hood in its face. Its face was just a grinning skull, a skull with horns. Its eyes were red, the eyes of the devil himself. I don't mean I saw it standing behind me in the mirror. It was in the mirror itself. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. It reached out of the mirror. It didn't have hands. It had claws, and it tried to grab me. She'd thrown a bottle of lotion at the mirror, shattering the glass. Then, to be safe, had done the same to all the other mirrors in the house. How could you stay in this house with all this happening to you?" I asked her. She shrugged sadly. "I don't have anywhere else to go, and no one will take me in. The nights were awful, but it was always better during the days. At least then I could get some sleep. It always stopped by morning and never happened during the day." She suddenly shuddered. "Until 3 days ago. Then it started happening all the time, day and night. I wasn't safe no matter what time it was. It had all come to a head late this morning. The pounding had gradually gotten more violent and forceful until all the closet doors were rattling in their frames. Mrs. Garrity knew that even with the boards nailed over them, it was only a matter of time until that thing broke through. In desperation, she'd begun praying and reading from the Bible, which had only caused the entity in the closet to laugh at her mockingly. Finally, she'd gotten out Bill's shotgun and fired it through the closet door. For a minute or so, there wasn't a sound, she told us. I started to think it was finally over. And then I saw those red eyes burning in the dark and the hole the shotgun had made. It chuckled, and it said one word to me. What word did it say? I asked her. Tonight, she said, and began to tremble. She lowered her head into her hands and began to sob again. Jerry and I were silent for some time, trying to absorb what she just told us. We looked at each other, deeply troubled by her story. Neither of us actually believed it, of course, but it was obvious the poor woman was deeply disturbed. She was having some kind of nervous breakdown. Maybe her frayed grip on reality had finally snapped, or maybe it was old age taking its toll on her mind. One thing was clear. It wasn't safe for her to be alone anymore, especially not here. It wasn't healthy for her. Hell, for all we knew. Maybe her paranoid delusions were the result of some dangerous form of mold that had formed in the house. Jerry and I excused ourselves for a moment, then stepped outside to talk in private. We both agreed she needed help. She needed to be institutionalized, but for now it was best she stay somewhere else. We went back in and told Mrs. Garrity was coming with us. She was going to spend the night in a motel room in town. And tomorrow, Jerry added, we were going to find a priest who would come out and exorcise the evil spirit that had been bothering her, getting rid of it once and for all. She broke down again, this time crying in relief. Then she hugged me and my partner, thanking us over and over again. We drove her to a cheap motel in town and checked her in. Her mental state already seemed to improve in that short amount of time being away from that house. She smiled and told us she couldn't wait to finally get a decent night of sleep without having to worry about that thing banging on the doors. I think mostly she was just glad she wouldn't have to be afraid anymore of the entity she was convinced was lurking in her home. We both smiled at her and said goodbye, getting in the cruiser and driving away. Our smiles faded as soon as we pulled away from the motel. We both drove in grim silence. We both liked old Mrs. Garrity. In spite of all the time she'd made herself a nuisance to the police department with her bogus calls and erratic behavior, we were sorry her mental state had deteriorated to such a point that she could no longer look after herself. We told the chief her story when we got back. He sighed sadly and nodded, agreeing that she had to be committed somewhere. Tomorrow, he and I were going to drive out and personally visit her son and daughter and explain to them what was going on. And if they still refused to do what needed to be done, the chief would see to it himself that Mrs. Garrity got the help she needed. But we never got the chance. The last time we ever saw Mrs. Garrity was when Jerry and I left her at the motel. Around 4 a.m. the next morning, I was awakened by an urgent phone call from the chief telling me to get over to the motel as soon as possible. He wouldn't say why over the phone, but I already had a hunch it had something to do with Mrs. Garrity. I felt an awful sense of dread as I got dressed. I wondered if maybe she'd taken her own life in that motel room. When I arrived outside the motel, my fears were confirmed when I saw crime scene tape blocking the door to Mrs. Garrity's room. The chief, along with Jerry and Pete and Vance, were gathered outside, along with a couple cops from the state police and a pair of detectives from the city. The chief greeted me with a grave expression as I approached. He told me that Mrs. Garrity was gone. At first, I thought he meant she was dead. Then, seeing the solemn look on my face, he clarified himself. She was literally gone. I looked at him, confused. I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, something that caused a ripple of fear in my heart. The chief was scared. He told me he didn't know what to make of it himself. People in the neighboring rooms had heard blood-curdling screams and sounds of violence coming from Mrs. Garrity's room around 2 a.m., and then nothing. They'd called the police department. Pete and Vance had been the first to arrive. They pounded on the door, but there'd been no response, so they'd forced the door open. When they saw what was inside, they'd called the chief himself. What did they find? I asked him, maybe you ought to come see for yourself. He told me, leading to the doorway and under the crime scene tape, he explained to me that they'd found no sign of forced entry, and that the door and windows of the motel room had all still been locked from the inside when Pete and Vanson showed up. I took a look around, feeling a shiver run through my body. There was fresh blood splattered around the room, on the walls, the floor, the bed, even the ceiling. The blood-stained bed sheets had been ripped away from the mattress, as if someone had desperately tried holding on to them as they were pulled from the bed. There were 10 very thin trails of blood in the carpet leading away from the bed. 10 thin trails of blood that had been made by 10 desperate, terrified fingers clawing for purchase as their owner was dragged away. I followed the bloody finger marks across the floor, away from the bed to where they ended, at the closet. I looked at them. Then I looked at the chief. He looked back at me, his face hard and impassive. I could see fear in his eyes. I approached the closet. The door was standing open. I stood there, looking in for some time. The closet was empty, completely empty. There wasn't even blood on the floor. They never found Mrs. Garrity Part 2. I told you in my last post that the Garrity case was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. And that apart from that, nothing much out of the ordinary has ever happened to me in the course of a mostly uneventful and rather dull career enforcing the law in a rural, middle-of-nowhere town most of you have probably never even heard of. Well, until about a week ago. That was mostly true. Mostly. But in light of recent circumstances, I feel I have a new story I have to share with you. But first I have to back up a bit and tell you about something that happened about 3 years ago. It was a strange thing, but at the time I wrote the first story, it hardly seemed important enough to warrant mentioning. Cops get used to dealing with all kinds of weirdos, people reporting, confessing to false crimes and things of that sort. People confessing to murders they didn't commit, etc. I'm sure police departments in the big cities have to put up with crap like that all the time, but even small town departments get it once in a while. It was, I believe, late June or early July of 19. I was on the night patrol at the time. I usually work the day, but I was filling in for Vance because he was out to get his appendix removed. Joe, a rookie we took on just the year before, was doing the day patrol with my partner Jerry. It was an early summer evening, and I was in the office shooting the breeze with the chief and Pete, just getting ready to punch in for my shift when a woman appeared in the police station, surprising us. I say appear because afterwards, when the three of us discussed what happened, we were all in agreement that none of us had seen or heard her enter the room. It was as if one moment she wasn't there, the next she was. She was young, perhaps late teens or early 20s, slender, and might have been pretty, but you wouldn't have known that looking at her in her current condition. For one thing, she was soaking wet. I mean, absolutely drenched head to foot. Her dripping hair was matted and tangled all around her face, and her dress, which I noticed looked kind of old-fashioned, was saturated. She was panting, completely out of breath, as if she'd just run a mile, and her eyes were frantic and wide with fear. Another thing I noticed was she was very pale, unnaturally pale. I mean, her skin looked almost bone white. I guess we were all pretty taken aback by her appearance. For a few seconds, the three of us, me, Pete, and the chief, just gaped at her in shock. "Please," she said, "you have to help me." The chief, who had been sitting at his desk working on a jigsaw puzzle, found his voice. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" He asked a little awkwardly. "Someone kidnapped me. I managed to get away. I think they were going to kill me." We all exchanged a sober look. Things like this didn't happen very often in our town. "Why don't you have a seat and tell us all about it, ma'am?" The chief asked her politely, and gestured to an empty chair next to his desk. She sat down, trembling slightly as if she was cold. The chief told Pete to go get a blanket for her, and Pete went to fetch one. The chief asked the young woman if she would care for some coffee, gesturing to the pot sitting on a table across the room. "No, thank you," she said distantly, looking past him into space, distracted or maybe in shock. "What's your name, miss?" the chief asked her. "Shirley," the young woman said. "Shirley Ann McDougal." The chief took a police report form out of his desk drawer and jotted that down. Pete came back into the office carrying a blanket, which he offered to Shirley Ann McDougal. She thanked him and wrapped it gratefully around her shoulders, but continued to shiver through the interview as if it was impossible for her to warm her body back up. "How old are you, Miss McDougal?" 19. He wrote that down. "Where do you live?" "Right here in town." "And how long have you lived here?" "My whole life." At this, the chief frowned a little. He threw a questioning look at Pete, who shrugged. Then me. I shook my head. I could see what was bothering the chief. When you've been a cop in a small town for long enough, you get to know most of the people who live in your jurisdiction. I've been a cop for 10 years at that point. Pete, who was older than me, had been one for close to 20, and the chief, who was older than both of us, had been one for nearly 40. And yet none of us had ever seen this woman, who claimed to have lived here her whole life, or heard of her before this night. "What's your address, Miss McDougal?" the chief asked her. "I live with my parents in their apartment above the hardware store they own. McDougal's Hardware on Main Street." That was when I knew there was something really off about this whole deal. There was no McDougal's Hardware on Main Street. In fact, I never heard of anyone named McDougal ever living in the area. The chief was looking at Shirley strangely, but he continued doing it by the book and didn't miss a beat. "Now, Miss McDougal, you can call me Shirley," she interrupted softly, still staring off vacantly and nothing in particular. "Shirley, why don't you tell us exactly what happened tonight?" So she told us, and her story only got stranger and stranger. I was coming back home from the movies. Me and my friends had gone to see the new Martin and Lewis comedy at the Mayan. Well, Pete interrupted her at that point, raising his hand. "I'm sorry. You say you went to the buy-in?" "Yes, to see Martin and Lewis." "Martin and who?" "You know, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. We want to see their new film, Partners. It just opened last week." Pete met my eyes with me. The look on his face was a combination of confusion and bewilderment. He mouthed the words. "What the hell is going on?" Shirley just went on. "Anyway, I was walking back home to my parents, and I stopped at Beckman's drugstore to get a chocolate malt first." Beckman's drugstore. That rang a bell somewhere in some distant corner of my memory. I dug for it, and after a moment it came back. Beckman's had been a pharmacy here in town when I'd been a little kid. An independent, family-run drugstore complete with an old-time soda fountain like something you would have seen back in the 1950s. It had been owned and operated by the Beckmans for 3 generations, until the last of them, old Clyde Beckman, had died back in the late 90s. His kids had sold the business, and now there was a CVS where it had once stood. I felt a shiver creep up my spine. I was going into the store, but a man approached me outside. He was an older man, maybe in his late 40s. Silver hair. He was dressed like a priest, and he had a crutch under one arm. He asked me if I could help him. He said his wallet had fallen under the seat of his car, and he wanted to know if I'd help him get it out. He was very polite. He seemed harmless, and I felt sorry for him because of the crutch. He led me over to his car. What kind of car was it, Shirley? The chief interrupted her. She thought about it for a few seconds. I think it was a Buick. Yeah, it was a dark Buick. Couple years old. Maybe a 53 or 54. A 1953 or 54 Buick that, according to Shirley McDougal, was only a couple years old. What the hell was this? Was this chick on something? Was she nuts or just pulling some stupid prank? I searched her face, trying to detect a lie, but she seemed genuinely shaken by whatever she'd been through. Did you see the license plate, Shirley? The chief asked. I just caught a glimpse as we were going around it. I didn't see the numbers, but I noticed it was an out-of-state car. I think the license plate said Oklahoma. Then what happened, Shirley? The chief prodded her gently. I knelt down, and I was feeling beneath the driver's seat for his wallet. And then, she paused and took a long, shaky breath, then exhaled it sharply, as if mustering her courage to recall her ordeal to herself. Something hit me in the head. It hit me hard. It was him, the man dressed like a priest. He hit me from behind, I think with a crutch he was carrying. And then he hit me again. I was stunned. I think I might have even lost consciousness for a few moments. When I came to, he was dragging me around to the back of his car. I tried to fight him off, but he slapped me and told me to shut up or he'd kill me. He called me, She hesitated. I'd rather not repeat what he said. He lifted the lid of his trunk and shoved me inside, and then he slammed it shut. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and pounding against the truck, but he'd already gotten back in and started the car. And then he was driving. I was screaming and crying, praying, begging him not to hurt me. I told him I just wanted to see my parents again, but he kept driving. I don't know how long he drove. It was a long time, maybe an hour. But then something happened. He had an accident. I heard him shout in alarm, and then the car swerved. I could hear the tires shriek. We went off the road. The next thing I knew, the trunk was filling with cold water. We must have crashed into a lake or a pond. I was panicking, pounding, trying to force the trunk open. And then, I don't remember. It just went black for a while. The next thing I remember is splashing around at the surface of the water. I don't know how I managed to get out. I swam to the shore and climbed back onto the road, and I just started walking back into town. Her story finished. Shirley fell silent. She lowered her head, shuddering. None of us knew what to say. We stood there, trying to make sense of what she told us. I looked at Pete, then at the chief. The chief looked back at me, a disturbed expression on his face. May I use the telephone? Shirley asked, looking up. I want to call my parents to tell them I'm okay. Of course, Shirley, just give us 1 minute. We want to run this guy's description out on the radio. Get an APB going so we can catch this creep, the chief told her. Standing up and gesturing for me and Pete to follow him, he let us out of the office and shut the door. What the hell is she talking about, Chief? Pete asked. That Mayim Theater went out of business when I was a kid 30 years ago. There's a liquor store there now. Yes, and McDougal's hardware is long gone too, the chief replied. Long before your time, either of you. It burned down when I was a kid, back in 67, I think maybe 68, and the McDougals went up in flames with it. Died in their sleep. Pete and I took a moment to absorb that. So what the hell's her deal? Is she crazy or strung out or what? The chief shrugged. Who knows? Maybe something really did happen to her tonight, and the trauma caused a psychotic break. Dissociative identity disorder, whatever they call it. He opened the office door and motioned us back in. Shirley McDougal, or whatever her name really was still sitting beside the chief's desk. She looked up as we entered. Can I call my parents now? She asked urgently as the chief sat back down. They must be worried sick about me. Shirley, the chief said, staring at her thoughtfully. Who's the current U.S. president? She blinked at him. What? Dwight Eisenhower. What's this have to do with anything? The chief looked at her for what seemed like a long time. Shirley, he asked her softly, do you know what year it is? She gave him a puzzled look. Excuse me, do you know what year it is? 1956? Why are you asking me this? No, Shirley, he said gently, looking at her with compassion. It's not 1956. It's 2019. 1956 was 63 years ago. She looked at him, confused. 2019? What are you talking about? Are you crazy? Look at the calendar behind me, Shirley, he told her, pointing at the bulletin board on the wall above him. Looking at him suspiciously, Shirley stood and approached the calendar. She stood directly in front of it, staring for some time. Then she backed away, her eyes widening in disbelief. No, this is some sort of trick. It has to be. She stammered, terrified and confused. Shirley, the chief said, pointing at the computer on his desk. Have you ever seen one of these before? But Shirley ignored him. Her attention had shifted to a large map of the United States on the opposite wall. She stepped up to it, studying it intently. Hawaii and Alaska, she muttered quietly to herself. She moved to the window and looked outside at the parking lot. The cars, she said, her voice rising in panic. What's wrong with the cars? Why do they look so different? We stood by the chief's desk, just watching her dumbfounded and not knowing how to react. Shirley turned to face us, beginning to shudder. She fell to her knees, clutching her midsection, her breath heaving in and out like she was hyperventilating. I think I'm going to be sick, she uttered in a low, choked voice. Please, show me where the ladies' room is. I'm going to be sick. Pete looked to the chief, who nodded, grim-faced. Pete helped Shirley to her feet and escorted her out of the office. He looked back at us, and the chief mouthed at him. Keep an eye on her. Pete nodded. Then they stepped through the door and out of sight. A long, awkward moment of silence passed with the chief sitting at his desk, distractedly toying with a piece of his jigsaw puzzle, and me standing there. Both of us were trying to wrap our heads around what had just happened. The entire encounter, from the moment the soaking wet woman had entered the police station to when Pete had taken her to use the restroom, had lasted no more than 20 minutes. I finally broke the silence, forcing out a nervous laugh to try to lighten the mood. Weird night, huh? Said to the chief. He just grunted in response, seeming preoccupied with something. So who should we call? The state cops or the hospital? I asked. He didn't answer me. He was still lost in thought, staring intently straight ahead. What's on your mind, Chief? Something just dawned on me a couple minutes ago, just when Pete and her were leaving. He looked at me, troubled. 1956 was 2 years before I was born, but McDougal's hardware store was still in town until I was 9. My parents used to do business with the McDougals. I remember something from when I was a kid, overhearing my parents talking. Something about the McDougals having a daughter that vanished under mysterious circumstances. I looked at him. Come on, Chief, you're not telling me you're actually buying into this thing, are you? It wouldn't be the first time something strange has happened in this town, he said, giving me a pointed look. I think you know what I'm talking about. I didn't answer him, but I didn't know what he was talking about. In my mind, I saw images I cared not to remember. A blood-spattered motel room, sheets torn from the bed, bloody claw marks on a carpet trailing off and stopping abruptly at an empty closet. I shuddered at the memory, and then suddenly there was a commotion from down the hall. Pete was yelling for both of us to come quickly. Shit, what now? I muttered as we hurried out of the office. Pete was standing down the hall just outside the women's restroom. He looked rattled. "She's gone," he said as we got closer. "What the hell do you mean she's gone?" the chief demanded. "See for yourself," Pete answered and pushed open the restroom door. We looked in. All three stalls were standing with their doors open. Vacant. The chief turned to Pete. "Well, where the hell did she go? I thought you were watching her." Chief, I was standing right here outside the whole time, I swear it." Pete insisted, looking anxious and scared. He muttered something to himself, something I couldn't quite make out. I asked him to repeat it. He looked at me. I'd never seen Pete look so frightened before in my life. I said she was cold. When I was helping her up to go to the restroom, my hand touched her arm. It was so cold. It was like touching the skin of a corpse. The chief shot me a grim look, which I reciprocated, feeling a stirring of fear in the pit of my stomach. This was too much like what had happened back in 14. The chief and I entered the women's room and looked around. There wasn't much to see and no obvious place to hide, 3 empty stalls and a sink. There was a small window directly above the sink. I approached it, certain I was going to find it locked. But the latch was unfastened. I felt a weird sense of relief at that this avenue of denial, this fallback position of logical explanation hadn't been blocked, because otherwise. "Chief," I said, "window's unlocked." Outside quickly, he ordered me. Me and Pete hastily followed him down the hallway to the main entrance of the municipal building. We went outside and looked around. All we saw was the front lawn of the building and Main Street beyond it, mostly deserted on this early summer evening. The window in the women's restroom faced the left side of the building. We went in that direction, but when we turned the corner, there was nothing there, no sign of the mysterious young woman who called herself Shirley McDougal. I looked up. The window was about 10 feet above the ground. And while small, it was not impossible for someone with a smaller build like Shirley to have squeezed through it. What I'm getting at is that it was conceivable for her to have escaped out the window, dropped to the ground below, and then disappeared into the night. The grass had been recently mowed and it hadn't been raining, so the ground hadn't left any footprints we could see to determine which direction she'd gone. We looked at that window for some time. Finally, the chief lowered his head and emitted a slightly shaky chuckle. "She must have closed it behind her before she jumped." "Guess she was not," saw the chief, Pete said. "Guess so. Or lying or on drugs, or who the hell knows." But that troubled, disturbed look was still in the chief's eyes. And I think he was trying to rationalize what had just happened as much as I was. "Let's go back inside," he told me and Pete. And that's just what we did. It was easier for us to believe that we'd just been dealing with some deeply disturbed young woman, or a flake looking for attention. Because otherwise, we would have to accept that we'd been questioning a ghost that summer night. The chief did report the incident to the state police, and they put out an alert for her. But nothing ever came of it, and we never saw or heard from Shirley and McDougal ever again. I did some research in my free time, just out of curiosity, or so I told myself, searching online and looking through old newspapers and town records. There really had been a young woman named Shirley Ann McDougal, the 19-year-old daughter of Wilbur and Harriet McDougal, the owners of McDougal Hardware. And she really did disappear one night, back in early August of 1956, never to be seen or heard from again. But for all I knew, the crazy woman we dealt with had known about the case and incorporated the details into her delusion. There were no pictures, if you were wondering. I looked but couldn't find anything in the newspapers. I even tried locating any of Shirley's surviving relatives to no avail. It had been over 60 years, and presumably all the family photographs had been destroyed in the fire that killed her parents. I forced it all out of my mind. I was a police officer, and there were more pressing matters to deal with. Eventually, I forgot all about my strange encounter with Shirley McDougal. Then, last week I went into the station to start my usual shift. The chief beckoned me into his office, his face pale and grave. He didn't say anything, just pointed to the newspaper on his desk. I picked it up, and I looked at the headline Lake Yields Dark Secret after 66 years. One town over. Some guy in a boat had been trying out his new fish-locating sonar and had inadvertently stumbled upon an old car at the bottom of the lake, 20 feet down. He went to the police, and they'd hoisted the car to the surface. An old, battered, rusted wreck that had once been a 1953 Buick. A set of skeletal remains belonging to a man had been found in the driver's seat. The old Buick had an Oklahoma plate, and when the authorities ran it through the system, they discovered the vehicle was a match for a car registered to a man the FBI had been looking for back in the mid-1950s. A drifter and convicted offender they suspected of being a serial killer, or a spree killer as they called them back then, who was believed to have abducted and murdered up to 10 young women in 6 different states. His last intended victim had managed to escape. She claimed a man dressed as a priest had tried to lure her into his car and then overpower her. This had happened in Iowa, one state away from Minnesota. After that, he just vanished off the FBI's radar. When they conducted a more detailed inspection of the wrecked Buick, they made a further gruesome discovery. The second skeleton was found in the trunk, a skeleton belonging to a young woman. I've always had a weird group of friends. They all went into manly careers like logging, oil rig work, construction. I'm the black sheep of our little group of high school buddies. I went into IT. They give me shit all the time about working on nerd stuff, and I give them shit back. I don't like computers. I dig holes. I'm an unlikely addition to their group of friends, but it worked somehow. So there we are in a bar. This is one of those rare occasions when everyone's back in town together, and we're getting drunk, swapping stories about horrors on the job. Someone talks about when part of their oil rig blew up, killing 3 people a few years ago. Danny, an actual lumberjack, talks about seeing a guy working not 10 feet from him get his arm torn clean off by a log line. Just a quick zip and a limb went flying. He held a shirt to the wound as the man bled out, babbling and whining in agony until a life flight came 2 hours too late. And all the while I'm sitting there knowing I've got a story. But it's not the kind of story I'd usually bring up to a bunch of drunk friends. Not the kind of story I'd tell anybody. It's the kind of truly unsettling memory that you worry about. Should you tell it, you might give it life. You might feed it somehow, make it more real. I carry it around in the back of my mind like a caged, dangerous animal, not considering letting it out. Until now, everyone said something already, and I'm just sitting there looking sheltered, looking obvious. So I ignore that voice in my head that says don't. I ignore my dry, tightening throat. Don't. I've got one. My voice cracks, and they look surprised. I'm surprised. They all give me doubtful, amused looks. Go on then, the looks say, and so I do. I work from home on our 30 acres outside of a small town in Alaska. I live alone. No kids. It's a college town, just a small liberal arts college of a few 100, but it's the heart of the town. The campus is huge, with the natural beauty of the area being a big draw. Reservation land neighbors the campus, and the tribe sort of acts like park rangers for the hundreds of miles of forest trails. My own land borders part of the campus on the other side. One day, I'm out at the edge of the cleared part of my property, right behind my house. It's probably about 200 yards from the house. I'm watering a set of raised beds I have right near the tree line, just enjoying the scorching sunny day. And that's when something weird happens. There's this sound, like a record of someone speaking, coming from a few 100 feet into the woods. It's like someone talking to you through a bad cell connection where only parts of the words are coming through, and it's just noise. But you can tell it's supposed to be words. I just stood there listening to the noise, curious, but not afraid. I didn't even turn the hose off. I think, looking back, that's why it took me so long to get freaked out, to start taking it seriously. Weird things like that, supernatural things. They happen at night, deep in the woods. Not at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, while standing right in your backyard. After about 30 seconds, it just stops. I turn the water off, then figure out if it actually stopped or just got quieter. Nothing. I file it away as a minor oddity, something to be brought up later as a casual conversation token, or more likely forgotten. That was my first regret. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I'm on a hike at the back of my property on one of the trails I started last summer, which is pretty overgrown at this point. I'm strolling, lost in thought beneath the tree cover, simply enjoying the gorgeous midsummer weather. I'm pulled from my thoughts when I hear the odd sound in the woods. Far in the distance, there's the sound of garbled human speech. The forest around me, though, is oddly quiet. Now, I'm not much of a risk taker, and I generally prefer looking irrational to looking dead. I casually turn and walk back towards the trail entrance, not wanting to encourage any large predators by fleeing suddenly. What the hell's making that sound anyway? I resolve to bring Danny along to check it out when he comes to visit in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I'm back at the trailhead, alone because Danny bailed on me. I told him that if I died, I'd be coming straight to his apartment to haunt the shit out of him. I'm looking down the seemingly innocuous forest trail. I steel myself. I check my pack, bear spray, and brand new Bowie knife, which I have no idea how to use. It's just the sound, I tell myself. I start down the path. A few miles, and about an hour in, I hear the first signs of that odd sound in the distance. It's maybe 100 yards ahead and just off the side of the trail. The forest, however, moves and rustles with life in that familiar, reassuring way. I carry on. As I approach the origin of the sound, I put my hand to the hilt of my bowing knife. The source of the sound, now within 20 feet or so, is not immediately apparent. It's the same stream of incoherent babble, but with a distinct crackling sound to it. Looking up, I see a small black speaker fixed to a tree about 10 feet from the ground. I'm fairly confident the speaker poses no threat. I take my hand from my knife and inspect it. Written on the side of the speaker in white paint is the name of the local college and the words Forestry Department. A clue and a reasonable explanation. Go figure. Content that I won't have to stab anything or haunt any apartments this day. I head back home. During a slow day the next week, I called the Forestry Department of the college. Yes, I'd like to speak to the dean. No, I'm not a student. No, they don't know I'm calling. The dean answered in a bored voice, but seemed eager to answer my questions, as if I were the highlight of an otherwise mundane day. As it turns out, the speaker is, or was, a sort of live art project in which students could write and record poems to be spoken aloud in the forest. It's solar paneled, but he suspected the connection to the speaker I found had gone bad. Once per semester, someone was supposed to come out and upload new MP3s to a waterproof MP3 player near the base of each tree. He went on to say that they discontinued the project due to outcry from the nearby tribe. Initially, he ignored their request to take down the speakers, but the vice president of the college eventually stepped in when complaints persisted. Worried about souring good relations with the tribe, they probably missed my station when they want to take them all down, he said. Mystery solved. Hiking season passes without incident. About a month after the snow finally melted, I decided to go on another hike on the trail with the speaker. I've got some overnight camping gear with me, and I plan to camp out near my turnaround point a few hours away. I almost missed the speaker when I'm about an hour in. It's completely silent now. I stopped to poke at the electronics a bit, but there's nothing obviously wrong with it. The fraying connections appear to have finally worn out over the winter. I continue down the trail. About 2 hours later, I set up my tent and prepared a simple camp. It's late afternoon, but I'm restless. And with a few hours of daylight left, I decide to walk ahead of my turnaround point for a little bit. I pick a little offshoot trail that leads upward, perhaps with a promise of a nice view. Just a few minutes into the walk, my mind is drifting. I'm just soaking up the late afternoon sun and basking in the first good weather of the season. I've picked the perfect time to explore. Damn, this is nice, I think to myself. And a moment later, I hear that familiar, unsettling sound of speaking in the distance. I pause on the trail, my brain still registering the noise as something innocuous. This sound is a little different, and even so far away, I can tell that it's a higher quality than the first speaker. I get closer and have to go a little off the trail to make out the words. It's definitely missing that crackly sound, so I can easily make out the words. It's the sound of a woman reading poems, just as the dean said. Less perturbed than I once was, I decided to sit on a rock near the speaker, pull out my water, and take a little break. I'm sitting there listening to the sounds of the forest, and the voice reading the familiar poems. It still feels a little eerie, though, and after just a few minutes, I decide it's time to get going again. I toss my water bottle into my pack and stand to leave, and that's when I hear the other voice. Someone nearby is babbling these crazy nonsense words. I perk up, curious, but not yet afraid. It has this strange warbling sound, like the natural rise and fall of pitch in a sentence, but in all the wrong places. Like someone turning random words in a sentence into questions. It's the kind of sound you'd laugh at if you weren't alone in a forest. Miles and miles from help, the forest goes dead silent around me, as if flipping a switch. The sound begins trailing close through some thick brush in front of me. I'm totally frozen in place, just listening to this ridiculous noise like a giant's basso baby voice. I utter under my breath, "What the hell?" I see just a glimpse of something coming through the brush, and then my trance is broken. My conscious mind is slammed to the back seat as my animal instincts send me sprinting back toward the trail. I'm already careening back down the trail before I even realize what I was running from. And then it hits me. A wall of realization. A great towering cloud of cold, crippling realization. I actually stumbled. My neurons fire in slow motion. The implications are forming in my mind like a slowly condensing water droplet just before the release and then the fall. My chest tightens and I take a sudden sharp breath. It was a hand, some kind of elongated, grotesque hand reaching through the brush, a body to match that distorted voice. It's then that I hear it again on the path, right behind me. What the hell? It warbles, like it's learned a phrase for the first time, and it's trying out loud. And then I'm running. I'm barely touching the ground, feet flying down the tight forest trail in the late afternoon sun. Tree branches are slapping at me as I barrel down the path, careless, mindless. My nerves are on a knife's edge for the entire sprint back to camp. Ears pricked, skin covered in goosebumps. I enter a clearing and slow to walk cautiously into camp, my hand hovering lightly over my Bowie knife. I see my tent in a small clearing where the main trail splits into these smaller tributaries. The tent sits in the shade flat. Partially open, I stop staring at it. It would take about 10 minutes to pack it up. I contemplated it for about half a second. No. And then I'm moving again, back on the main trail. Now I'm holding a sustainable jog, but about 30 seconds later, I slide to a stop because I hear something new, and then I hear nothing. A quiet deeper than anything before. No distant birds. No rustling leaves. No quiet breeze or chirping insects. There's only complete and unnatural silence. It's almost suffocating. It's like having a giant glass jar drop around me. 1 second, there's a rich blanket of forest sounds. And the next, it's like I'm in a vacuum. I freeze. I can feel my heart pounding out of my chest. But otherwise, I'm as silent and still as the forest around me. The air is hot still and dead on my sweaty skin, like standing in a silent summer attic. An odd thought occurs to me, an intuition that I shouldn't move. People always get that feeling like they're being watched, but it isn't quite like that. It's not like being watched, it's like I'm being examined. And my gut's telling me to blend in, to do what the bugs and the birds and the trees are doing. Sit still and wait. Do as they do. This isn't something you run from. Do as they do and survive. So I wait, frozen in an awkward position, mid-stride, mid-breath, refusing to even blink or look around. I stand there, like a store mannequin in the closet, watching through wooden slats as something very bad looks back at me, trying to figure out if I'm actually a mannequin or just something pretending. We look at each other like that. This force, and for 10 seconds, my head is swimming with terror. 20 seconds, my lungs are screaming for air, and my heart is pounding. Still, it examines me, and suddenly the gaze is broken, its focus on something else. My vision narrows to a pinpoint because my brain is clamoring for oxygen. Far off, I hear a rustle of leaves, and then slowly it comes my way. Not the rustle of a creature, but a great collective exhale from the forest. The sound of the forest returns in a great sweep past me. I bend, put my hands to my knees, and join in with a heaving gasp of my own. The rest of the trip back is a barely restrained panic. I jump at every twig snapping, but I'm in a forced calm because the logical part of me knows I can't run forever. I set my pace at a brief hike for 2 hours into the late evening. It's getting dark by the time I get back to my property in the bar. My friends are all statues still, faces slack. No one touched their drink in 5 minutes. My whole body shaking as I absent-mindedly ran the fingers of both hands up through my hair. It was like I was staring down the barrel of a gun. A gun I couldn't see, but I knew. I knew that if I had so much as twitched, I wouldn't be here right now. They would have known I was there. They would have known I was real. And I never went back to that tent, I say, taking a sip of my beer and taking a little grim satisfaction in my friends' stunned, distant faces. They let out a few half-hearted, nervous chuckles at my attempt to lighten the mood. But otherwise, everyone seems intensely interested in their drinks, the table, or the floor. Shit, man, one of them eventually says. Yeah, I reply. We're all pretty quiet and unusually pensive until we pay our tabs and leave the bar. On the way out, one of my buddies pulls me aside and asks, "Was that really true? All of it, I mean?" I just sort of squint and look up at the stars in the Alaskan sky. Eventually, the words I'm looking for come to me. There's shit out there that no one can explain, things that don't have names. And I think every now and then someone comes across one. The smart people, the lucky people like me, are the ones who get to tell their stories. He looks at me for a moment longer. Then, seemingly content with my answer, he nods and walks to his car. "Night," he says. Of course, I don't tell him there's more. I don't tell him it wasn't some ethereal, invisible force staring me down in the woods. It was a monster. A lanky, horrid, yet somehow human thing. It was in the shape of a man, but it was no man. God gave me two gifts that day. The first was sparing my life, and the other was keeping that creature in the periphery of my vision. I did tireless research after that incident in the forest. I found out about a missing homeless man and the dismembered corpse the cops found in the woods. Parts of a corpse, anyway. And I found out about something called the Akafixity. I think that's how you say it. A follow-up call to the dean from the nearby university got me that, and it got me a meeting with the grandson of the shaman who asked the university to take the speakers down. I met with him the very next day. I don't know how well I can explain it. I don't think of it the same way my grandfather does, I says. I follow up immediately. Try me. You know how everything that's alive today has some of the same DNA? Like, if you go back far enough, we all have a common ancestor, even really different things like germs. Well, I think the Akondixity are in that family tree. I think they come from something else. He sort of trails off, perhaps expecting skepticism from me. 2 days ago, maybe. But he doesn't know that I have a good reason not to be a skeptic. These things aren't a joke. You know, he tells me, fingers wrapped around a frappuccino. People at the college think my grandfather's crazy. They only listen to him because he's respected in the tribe. But even though they respect him, most of the tribe thinks he's crazy too. Do you think he's crazy? I ask him. About this? He looks grave, and the sudden seriousness from this man surprises me. No, he's not crazy. He's not crazy. Because I saw one. It was like 5 or 6 years ago. I was out in the woods on an ATV, just weaving through trees, and I was going too fast. I was stupid back then. I did a lot of stupid shit anyway. I'm in some pretty sparse woods, so it's easy to see far off, and I see this animal laying down in the distance. I turn my ATV to get closer, and I can tell it's a deer. As I'm pulling up to it, I cut the engine and just roll to a stop about 20 feet from the thing. I think it must be hurt or something because its back legs aren't working, and it's pulling itself along by its front legs, thinking I'll need to kill it. I go to pull out my knife. As soon as I reach down, this thing's head just snaps towards me. And I don't mean it heard a sound and sort of looked around and saw me. It just immediately jerked its head right towards me. It didn't look right. It was like someone tried to make a deer, but didn't have all the right parts. It was all twisted and gangly, with these nasty, swollen eyes just staring at me. And I got this feeling like it was trying to figure me out, trying to figure out what I was. And then a couple seconds later, it just turned and dragged itself away. Wow, I say, with real awe. I pushed my ATV as fast as it'd go back to the house, and that's when my grandfather told me about the Akadixi. He said they were bad spirits that spawned deep in the forest. They're attached to signs of life, noise, sight, stuff like that. And when they find something alive, they sort of copy it, but they disassemble it first. Once they've copied something, they try and find more of it to make a better copy. I don't really know why. It's just what he told me. Most of the time they're harmless, but every now and then one shows up in the shape of a deer, a dog, or something else. And then some men go out and take care of it. Huh, so what did they do about the one you saw? They went out to find a deer. A real deer. When they caught one, they brought it to the Candick site. The only way to kill them is to make them copy something already dying. We sat in silence there for a moment. Drinks forgotten. I saw one. What? He says, surprised. Then I think I know why your grandfather wanted the speakers taken down. What he was afraid of. It happened. Wait, slow down. What are you talking about? There's a human ecodicity out there. A few hours later, we're standing at the trailhead behind my apartment. It's turning into evening now, with only about an hour of real daylight left. There's a group of men nearby from Aida's tribe, talking to each other in hushed voices. Behind them are a dozen or so women and children, and some of the women are crying. Ida, what's going on? I ask in whispered tones, but he motions for me to wait as the circle of shaman breaks up. An older man in his early 60s, who I assume is Ida's grandfather, walks over to us at the entrance to the trail. He doesn't stop to talk to us, but just nods his head in our direction, and continues past us down the trail. He has a wiry sort of strength to him, despite his age, and the feathered garb and war paint on his body lend him an air of danger. I see an ornate stone dagger on his belt as he goes. Eventually I speak. When's he coming back? And Ida just gives me this flat, mournful look. He isn't coming back. And then I remember Ida's words. The only way to kill them is to make them copy something already dying. I've been working as a cinema usher for 3 years, and by now it's become obvious to me that my cinema's rules are a bit out of the norm. Okay, that was a lie. Their bats hit insane, but you can be the judge of that yourself. My name is Sean. I'm 21 years old, and I've been working this job for 3 years now. There's 2 reasons why I ended up here, and why I didn't leave after I realized just how screwed up this place is. The first is that not many employers will hire a high school dropout with a criminal record for petty theft and drug possession. I made some bad decisions early on in my life, and even though I'm on the straight and narrow now, my life has been marked forever by those unfortunate choices. The second reason is the pay. A cinema usher's job is checking tickets, cleaning rooms between shows, and checking that every movie runs smoothly. Usually ushers earn minimum wage if they're lucky. I, on the other hand, get the same pay as the manager of any normal joint. Although when you take into account the stuff I have to deal with every day, it becomes a whole lot less alluring. But none of you really care about that, do you? You're here for the story, and I won't disappoint. So here they are, the rules of my cinema. Rule number 1, never ever open the door to room 3 once the movie has started. Sounds simple, right? This rule, and the time I almost broke it, were the first signs I got that the cinema wasn't 100% normal. Even knowing about room 3, you'll be tempted to go in. The room is clever. It'll try to trick you any way it can. You might hear something from inside. You might be addressed by someone wanting you to open it, but you should never ever do so. The first time I almost entered room 3 was a mere week after I got hired. I had read the rules, sure, and I had been confused by them, but I didn't question them. I needed this job badly. If I had to endure some extravagant, mysterious rules to get my paycheck, then so be it. I was cleaning up the main lobby, where the entrance to the individual projection rooms is, when I heard it, the thumping of something on a hard surface. And it was coming from room 3. I rushed over to the door. It was clear something was wrong inside. A thin curl of smoke was coming from under it. The thumping was louder now, as if someone was hitting the door from inside. The handle was turning, rattling in its joint, as the person on the other door tried desperately to get outside. Hello? I yelled, pressing my ear to the flat surface of the door. Let us out. Help us, came a voice from the other side. It was a woman's voice, terror audible in every word. Underneath it, I could hear a faint whooshing sound, like a strong wind in a tunnel. It took me a second to realize what it was. Flames. There's a door. The door's jammed. You have to let us out, the woman screamed desperately. The smoke coming from under the door was dark and acrid, and I coughed as it caught in my throat. The beating of fists on the other side resumed. Let us out. Please let us out. I reached for the door handle. Any thought of rules in my head was gone. There were people in there who needed my help. A hand reached out from behind me and grabbed my arm. I jumped in shock, twisting around it. Was David my manager? I'd only ever talked to him at my interview for the position, where he struck me as a calm but distant man. Now he was furious, anger engraved in every line of his face. Rule number 1. Never forget it. There's a fire inside David. The door's jammed. We got to get them out. A fire. Oh, it's clever today. David laughed to himself, trying it on the new guy too. Then he turned serious again. There's a reason we have rules. Leave room 3 alone. Everything's all right in there. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The woman from inside cried out again. She was choking on her words now as the smoke invaded her lungs. Please help me, Sean. I can't breathe. Let us out. David laughed again. You can hear her, David. They're going to die. I yelled, incredulous as to how he could be so heartless. Well, I wasn't going to let people die because of him and his bats hit crazy rules. I reached for the door handle. David looked me dead in the eyes. How does she know your name? I stopped short. Had I told her my name? No. I looked at the door again. No smoke, no hammering of fists. I cautiously knocked on it a few times. No one answered. David put one hand on my shoulder. You see, Sean, he said patiently. Room 3 stays closed. No matter what, in 20 minutes the movie will end and everyone will come out unharmed. I promise. But I heard her. I saw the smoke. I stammered, confusion taking over. You saw what it wanted you to see. Take it from me, Sean. Room 3 will try everything to get you to open that door. But it hasn't succeeded in 13 years, and it damn well won't succeed while I'm the manager here. I won't have that happen again. He led me away from the door gently. When the movie in Room 3 ended 20 minutes later, a crowd of people walked out. Everyone was unharmed. I checked the room afterwards. There were no signs of fire anywhere. Rule number 2. If you see a man dressed as a movie character leading children away from the lobby, notify the manager immediately. You know how a lot of cinemas hire people in costumes or suits to promote new movies? Like when a new Star Wars movie comes out and you have guys in stormtrooper armor walking around the building to hype people up. I hated that sort of stuff even before I started working here. One of the odd jobs I took up after dropping out of school was at a seedy, run-down amusement park outside town. I had to wear a rancid, unwashed fursuit of the park's mascot for 8 hours straight, 6 days a week. Even seeing one of those things nowadays makes me gag. Now, Rule 2 is a bit of a mystery. I've only ever had to follow it once, and I'm not even sure what really happened. But it's an interesting, albeit gruesome story, so you might enjoy it. The day it happened was our premiere of Avengers Infinity War. The manager had hired several cosplayers dressed as the main characters to walk around the lobby and take pictures with fans. Now, I was generally okay with that, despite my past experiences. The thing that made me nervous was how before the shift began, David rounded up all the ushers and made us memorize the list of superheroes we had hired. He was absolutely adamant about it, insisting that we knew them off by heart. If it wasn't for the incident with Room 3, I would have thought he was mad. But now I knew not everything was as it seemed in this place. It wasn't a long list, so I can remember it. Captain America, Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Thor. Retrospectively, the poor guy dressed as the God of Thunder must have been devastated by how fat his favorite character got in Endgame. I knew something was up when I exited one of the projection rooms and saw a person dressed as the one and only Iron Man walking slowly down the lobby towards the garbage room. Getting closer, I could see there was something seriously wrong with him. His suit had been high quality once, but seemed to be in disrepair now. It was grimy and scraped, some parts in danger of falling off altogether. He smelled horrible, like roadkill on a hot summer day. But the worst part was there was some sort of liquid seeping from between the joints of his costume. It was a sickening dark brown color, viscous, almost like a drying treacle. My heart stopped as I saw that behind him was a group of children. None of them could have been more than 13 years old. They stared vacantly forward, following the fetid figure as he led them away from the crowds in a demented column. My ordeal with Room 3 had taught me all I needed to know about the rules. I rushed over to the manager's office, tore inside, and yelled into David's room. Rule 2 Iron Man costume, heading towards the garbage rooms. 3 kids in tow. There was a bang from the office as David leapt from his chair, so fast it crashed to the ground. Shit, I should have known. I shouldn't have hired anyone. Damn it, I should have known. He was rummaging around in a drawer of his desk he had quickly unlocked. I caught a glimpse of what he was taking out before he hid it in a pocket of his trousers. A vial of some sort of clear liquid and a long, jagged knife made of what looked like bronze. As he tore out of the office, he stopped and grabbed me, pushing a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. Make sure no one goes into the garbage room. Don't let anyone inside. You got that? If I don't come out in 1/2 hour, hit the fire alarm and evacuate the building. Then call the number on this paper. There was no time for questions. David tore out of the room, and I ran after him. As we rounded the corner, I saw that Iron Man had almost got the children into the garbage room. He was maybe 3 meters away from the door, the kids still following blindly. David tore past them and rammed open the door. Then, in one clean movement, he grabbed the costume thing, threw it inside, and slammed the door shut. The children twitched like puppets with their strings jerked up and down. Then they looked around, confused. They probably didn't even know how they got there. So they did what any kid would do in that situation. They started to cry. It was 23 minutes before David left the garbage room. There were dark red marks on his once clean shirt, and a horrible stench wafted off him. He looked tired. Clean up there, Sean. If you find anything strange outside a garbage bag, don't touch it. Just come tell me. He stumbled off to his office. The garbage room was a wreck. The stinking dark liquid stained the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling in some places. In the corner, there were several black plastic bags. A wet patch of that noisome dark liquid was slowly spreading from underneath them. Rule number 3. If a man with a tattoo on his left cheek wants something from the lost and found, don't give it to him. Now, this one isn't exactly tied to a story I personally experienced, but I still have something to say about it. After the Rule 2 incident, David started treating me kinder. I guess he trusted me a bit more, since he knew I'd learned my lesson and understood that the rules weren't there for benign reasons. They were there to protect us all. I was curious about Rule 3 after some time. I summoned the courage to ask about it, so before one day's shift, I walked into the office and cautiously asked, David, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you could tell me more about Rule 3 by any chance. David smiled wryly. Curious, are you? Don't worry, I would be too. He began rummaging about in his drawers and file folders. Eventually, he handed me several yellowed papers stapled together in the corner. Here, read this when you're on your break. Hopefully it'll slake your curiosity. When my break came, I sat down in our locker rooms and did exactly that. The papers were actually several newspaper articles stapled together at first. I was 15 years old. Gruesome triple homicide. Family murdered in their own house. Sole survivor tells horrifying story. The neighborhood that was censored by me was left in shock yesterday after police found a gruesome murder scene in a house of local residents, the Prescotts. Of the family of 4, there was only one survivor. A 13-year-old censored by me, Prescott, who was found bound and gagged but otherwise unharmed in his family's living room next to the mutilated remains of his parents and older sister. Found at the crime scene was an umbrella which the survivor claims his mother had forgotten after the family's visit to the local cinema earlier that week. Cinema manager David told our reporters that the umbrella had been picked up by a tattooed man the day before the murder, who claimed it was his. Police are looking into the possibility this man was connected to the crime, but so far their search has proved unsuccessful. The next two articles were 12 and 5 years old, respectively, and published by different newspapers, but they told much the same story. A mass homicide. One mentioned an item from our lost and found being found at the scene from the crime. The other didn't. But David had written underneath in pencil, the same man. What does the tattoo mean? I need to make a rule about him. The last article was what really creeped me out, though. It wasn't modern. In fact, it was just a printed photo of an ancient-looking page. The year printed at the top announced it to come from London, 1899. The writing was hardly legible, but the headline told me all I needed to know. Fear the stage. London theater shuts down amid murder spree as mysterious killer claims forgotten items. Some rules are harder to follow than others, and some come up more often. Rule 4 is one of the rarer ones, and I thank God for that. If the lights go out while you're cleaning a room, take a seat. A movie will play. You have to watch till the end. Don't look away from the screen, no matter what you see or hear. This is the rule that gave me the most anxiety when I read it. Having already had a run-in with Rules 1 and 2, I knew just how serious following our commandments or failing to do so could be. My experience with rule number 4 happened when I was cleaning out room 1 after a movie. Without a warning, it happened. The thing I'd been dreading for months at that point. The lights went out. There wasn't a pop, like a light bulb going off. 1 second, I was in a well-lit room. Next, I was standing in pitch blackness. I froze. Even though I'd been mentally preparing myself for this for weeks, I froze. Take a seat. Damn you, take a seat. Finally, my limbs obeyed my mind. I leapt for where I hoped the nearest row was and rammed myself down into a place. Just in time, the screen lit up, filling with static, before resolving into the image of a dark, dank cellar. The image quality was ancient, like some Super 8mm film from the 90s. Through the grainy screen, I could make out that there was a single chair in the center of the room tied to it. I was a young man. He was struggling against his bonds, and I could tell he was injured. Narrow streams of blood streamed down his face from an injury above his brow, and his arms were rubbed raw from the ropes. There was something terribly familiar about the prisoner. Not his face. I'd never seen that in my life, but his clothes. I froze as I heard something move behind me. It was the creak of a cinema chair. My back crawled. Something had just sat down behind me. It took all my willpower not to swivel around or to jump from my seat and make a break for the entrance. I fixed my eyes on the screen, praying for this to be over soon. The man on the screen had stopped struggling. He was looking at something behind the camera. It took me a second to realize he had to be watching the cameraman. I almost jumped from my seat as a voice whispered behind me. What an actor, how the voice was low, a practically inaudible whisper. It sounded human, almost, but I knew immediately it was anything but. I can't explain precisely how. It was something about the cadence of the thing's speech, almost as if its throat wasn't quite made for human language, and it just did its best at mimicking what it had heard. Even worse, the voice was coming from slightly above me, not directly behind. Whatever was in the chair behind me, it had to be absolutely massive when standing up. Should I answer? Should I just keep watching? The rules hadn't told me about that. I remained silent, gripping the armrest to stop myself from shaking, eyes fixed forward towards the screen. The camera was moving as a person carrying it approached his prisoner. The man in the chair was trying desperately to recoil, but his binds were too tight for anything but the slightest movement. And as the camera got closer, I recognized what was so horribly familiar about him. His clothes. He was wearing a cinema uniform. My cinema's uniform. Where do you think they got the costumes? Whispered the thing sitting behind me. Sadistic irony dripped from every word. It was playing with me. I didn't answer. The movie went on for about half an hour. I won't tell you exactly what I saw. I don't want to think about it more than I have to. I'm not sure that stuff would be allowed here, not even in description. Suffice to say, I wouldn't wish such a fate upon my worst enemy. At one point, I retched and vomited over myself on the floor. As my stomach convulsed, I almost took my eyes off the screen And at that moment, I felt the thing's hot, stinking breath on my back. It wanted me to look away. It wanted me to give in. I looked up, again fixing my eyes on the gruesome scene playing out on screen. The thing behind me spoke only once more before the lights came on as abruptly as they had turned off. It sounded frustrated, angry even. You know the saying, Sean, rules are made to be broken. Or at least that guy thought so. I wish I could end the story there, but unfortunately, there's just a bit more to it. Because the guy on the screen had been a worker here, because he had died. For breaking a rule because David hadn't told us everything, instead keeping us on some sort of bullshit need-to-know basis. Someone had suffered a fate worse than death because of his secrecy, and I would have him explain himself. Still covered in my own sick and cold sweat, I stormed through the lobby, ignoring the disgusted looks of the customers there. I slammed into the office. David looked up calmly. Rule 4 or Rule 11? Rule 4. Good. Good, you knew what the risk was. You knew what could happen. But you didn't tell anyone. That guy I saw, the things that it did to him. You could have stopped that. David sighed tiredly. It's better this way, Sean. What? How can it be? Let me explain something to you, David said, getting up to stand eye to eye with me. There was a hint of steel in his voice now, and a flash of suppressed anger in his look. I shut up. Some things can be avoided if you know about them. Room 3 is like that. If you know what it wants and how it will try to get it, it's easier not to fall for it. But some things, Sean, some things only get stronger the more you know about them. You can avoid breaking rule number 4 with what you know right now. You just need to keep watching. But the more you know about it, the more direct the thing in that room can be in its attempt to get you to look away. And the last guy, the one I saw on screen, he knew too much, even more than you do now. It was a mistake I will never repeat and a lesson I will never forget. There's a threshold, Sean, that I can't allow you to cross. If you know too much, no amount of willpower or strength will keep your eyes on that screen. Rule number 5. If you encounter a room where all customers are looking directly at you and smiling, inform the manager immediately. Rule number 5 is the one which raised the most questions in my mind about the cinema and my work. My encounter with it occurred about 1.5 years into my time here. Something you should know about the work of a cinema usher. We need to check that every movie is running smoothly with working subtitles and so on. We're only obligated to do so at the beginning of each projection, but if we've had some free time during our shift, we like to check in at random to make sure everything is all right. Unfortunately, it's exactly because of this that I entered room 5 one day, only to have a heart attack as I realized that every single person inside was looking me dead in the eye, smiling eerily. Taking care not to even blink, I slowly backed out of the room. The customers never broke eye contact, not even a blink. The second I was in the relative safety of the lobby, I ran over to David, who was talking with a customer in our small bar. Rule 5, I said once I reached him. David went pale. The customer, a young, attractive woman, looked over at him in confusion. "Excuse me," David muttered in her direction before turning to me. "Which room?" "5. Follow me." We ran over to the room. Once inside, David gestured for me to remain at the bottom of the rows of seats. "Stay here." He didn't need to tell me twice. The room full of customers was deadly quiet. Every head silently turned to follow David as he walked in front of the screen and stopped in the middle of the room. "What do you want?" he said to the room at large. Every person in the room opened their mouth in unison and said, in a perfect chorus, "Hello, manager." "It's been a long time." "Cut the crap," growled David. "I know your game. What do you want this time?" The room laughed in chilling synchrony. "Always so direct. I always liked you. More than your predecessor, you know." David's jaw clenched. His hands were rolled into fists. I'd never seen him this angry. "Just tell me what you want," he hissed through his teeth. "Tell me what you want. And let these people go." "Ah, so impatient, so eager to get it over with," the crowd answered. "I want you to open room 3 right now." David went pale. "No, ask something else. There are lines I will not cross. There are rules." The things behind the eyes of the crowd laughed as one. Ah, yes, your precious rules. You think they can stop anything? They stop nothing, David. They only delay it. Giving the information for free, David said sarcastically. You've changed since the last time we talked. I only tell you what you already know, and my price does not change. You will open room 3 again. For the first time, David hesitated, only for a second, but the things noticed and laughed cruelly at him. I've already told you. I won't do it. That rule is never broken, he said finally. Do you forget your history after a mere 13 years? The crowd sneered. The fate of these people is in your hands, David. You know what happens to them when my price is not paid. Do you seek to atone with this meaningless resistance for the sacrifice that was made because of your mistake? I don't atone, David hissed, and I made no mistake. Will the one who you miss so dearly agree? I think not. The thing's intoned. There was a charged silence. Then the crowd spoke again. The price has been paid. These people are safe. David blinked in confusion. What? What price? Room 3 was never the price. The anguish of your remembrance, as well as the unanswered questions that will now plague this servant of yours. Worth the price, you bastard, David whispered. David stormed out of the room without another word. The crowd followed him with their gaze and then fixed it upon me. A smile and nod. Then the crowd looked up as one and shed their identical behavior. A hidden tension was released. They were free. Rule number 6, if a customer hears noises in air ducts, assure them that you will look into it. Take one of the packages marked R6 from behind the bar, enter the air ducts through the garbage room, and place the contents of the package at least 10 meters away from the entrance. Leave the air ducts as fast as possible. This is one of the easiest rules to follow, although the time limit is worrying at first. It's also one of the most commonly employed, usually coming up about once a week. Thankfully, I've never seen anyone fail to uphold it. The first time I had to feed the thing in the air ducts was a very busy shift. We had premiered The Rise of Skywalker a few days before, and we were still being swamped by crowds of customers. I was cleaning up the lobby from ever-present spilled popcorn when an angry-looking young man wearing a Star Wars shirt stormed over to me. Good day, sir. How may I? Yeah, man, whatever. He cut me off immediately. Could you fix your damn aircon, dude? There's something banging around in there, near the grill in our room. I didn't pay for this kind of shit. I clenched my teeth to control my temper at the man's manners, but managed to remain calm. Yes, sir, of course. Sorry for the inconvenience. David will probably forgive you for letting a room of people die at the hand of God knows what, but he won't allow you to be rude to customers. He's just like that. After the customer had stalked off again, I got one of the marked packages from behind the bar. It was strangely heavy, and I could feel moisture seeping out from inside it. Doing my best to ignore it, I crossed over to the garbage room and opened the grill covering the air ducts. I could hear whatever the customer had been complaining about. A fast tip-tap sound, like fingers drumming endlessly against the side of the duct. My skin crawled. It was uncomfortably too close to the sound of dozens of long, thin legs. I took a deep breath and crawled into the chute. The air inside was cold and drafty. The passage was tight, and I was forced to go prone, propelling myself forward on my elbows and knees. Crawling forward, I could see by the dim light that there was a pile of something up ahead, around the 10-meter mark. As I reached it, I groaned under my breath. In the chute before me lay a pile of gnawed animal bones. With shaking fingers, I undid the wrapping on the package and dropped the whole chicken onto the top of the pile of remains. The sounds in the chute stopped. I held my breath. Then it returned faster, louder than before, a frantic, hungry staccato rhythm. Terror and adrenaline flooding my brain, I scooted back downwards to the mouth of the passage. How long had I been there? How long did I have left? 30 seconds? 20? The clattering of legs was mixed now with a scraping sound as something chitinous and heavy dragged itself down the corridor towards the food and towards me. And finally, my legs met the end of the duct. Kicking frantically, I dropped down to the floor of the garbage room and slammed the grill shut. The clattering inside had stopped. Listening carefully, I could make out the sound of tearing flesh. And this is one of the easier rules. One of the rarest rules we have is rule number 7. I've only ever experienced it once about 6 months ago, and I sincerely hope I will never have to deal with it ever again. Rule number 7. If you notice shadows being out of sync with your surroundings, return to the last room you're in as quickly as possible alone. Close the door, then return to the lobby. Until you do so, do not touch your shadow under any circumstance. The biggest danger you can face in this job is becoming too used to the weirdness. That's the mistake I made with rule number 7. I dropped my guard. I stopped paying attention. I had walked to the other side of the lobby from room 6 before I realized that I had no shadow. Cold sweat covered my brow. I looked back the way I'd come. My shadow, completely disconnected from me, lay on the floor by the door to room 6, and another usher, a man by the name of Liam, stood between me and it. He was looking straight in my eyes, a narrow grin on his face. I had to think quickly. Whatever was going on, I had to get back to room 6, but with Liam in my way, I had no route to get there. Not without confronting him. "Sean, is everything all right?" David called from the door to his office. He sounded concerned, worried even. Could I answer him? Would that just make things worse? I ignored the question and started heading back to room 6. The more I looked around me, the more clear it became how strange my surroundings were. Every shadow was thrown in a different direction, as if each item was illuminated by a different light source. I was nearing Liam now. I slowed down, walking in a manner I hoped would appear nonchalant if I could just get past him and the door. "David asked you a question, Sean," Liam said. The thin smile was still plastered over his face. He stepped in front of me, barring my way. "I heard him, Liam. I just forgot something in room 6. "And what was that, Sean? What did you forget?" He knew. I could see it in his eyes. Liam, the thing masquerading as Liam, knew what I was trying to do. It knew. I wasn't fooled by its act. I heard the office door open behind me. Footsteps approached. Sean asked David, "What did you forget?" He walked around me to stand next to Liam. I had to convince them. I didn't realize anything was wrong. I couldn't get to room 6. Otherwise, even if I did make it there, the rules said I had to be alone. They couldn't follow me. I forgot to clean up a spilled drink. I'll just get some paper towels from the garbage room and go and finish it. I smiled weakly, cursing my quivering voice. It was a bad lie. I could see it in David's eyes. He wasn't convinced. "Liam, help him out with that, would you?" he said, walking away to the office. Liam smiled at me again. It was a horrible sight. "Well, let's go, Sean," he sneered. We walked to the garbage room. My mind raced as I tried desperately to think of a way out of this situation. Liam was watching me from the corner of his eye, waiting for me to make a run for room 6. Desperate plan formed in my head. It was a gamble, and for all I knew, the other rules of the cinema didn't even apply in this place, whatever it was. But it was the only way to escape that I could think of. We entered the garbage room. Liam wasn't even acting inconspicuous anymore. He was looking straight at me, still smiling that horrible grin. With Liam following, I walked to the back of the garbage room and punched him in the face with all my strength. The thing wearing his body stumbled backwards, surprised, and the second time it bought me. I scrabbled at the air duct in the back of the room, opening it at the last second. The thing's fingers grabbed me from behind and turned me around to face it. The look of humanity Liam had worn before was shedding off like a snake's skin. His face grew disproportionate, his eyes pools of shadow. He laughed in my face. "I knew you weren't fooled. I knew it. Well, playtime's over. Time for you to meet your shadow," it said insanely. "I hope you like it here, because you're going to be staying with me." I kicked out desperately, fighting against the thing's strength as it gripped my arms. I managed to turn us around, ramming its back into the open air duct. It screeched in pain. Ever since your master has made his foolish rules, I've been alone. Well, no more. First you, then him. Finally, I heard what I'd been desperately hoping for. A sound coming from the air duct behind Liam. The scuttling of many thin feet. The thing had only a second to realize what I'd done. Its eyes widened. No. Then it was ripped backwards as a terrible force tore it into the vent. Bones cracked as its back and legs bent in angles. They were never meant to. Then it was gone, screaming and cursing. I stumbled away from the wall. I had little time. As I ran across the lobby towards room 6, the thing wearing David's body tore out of the office. It screamed in frustration as it sprinted towards me. I reached room 6. My shadow coiled on the ground, trying to reach me, but coming just short. David was near, meters away from me, a cry of anger and desperation filling the air. I flung open the door, jumped inside, and slammed it behind me. Silence dropped like a stone, cautiously. I opened the door again. The lobby was empty. I looked down and heaved a sigh of relief. My shadow was once again at my feet. If a garbage bag begins moving violently or making noises, dispose of it in the special chute in the garbage room. Do not open the bag. One of the jobs we have to do here is clear out the garbage room after every shift. This means loading up all the trash on a trolley and taking it to the basement parking lot where a truck will come pick it up every week. Rule number 8 is probably the worst after number 4. It's not as mentally scarring, but it can still mess up your mind if you think too much about it. It certainly made me pretty miserable when I had to deal with it the first time about a year back. I was almost done with the trash that day. One more trip with the trolley should have done it. I was looking forward to the end of my shift and the warm embrace of my bed at home. That's when a garbage bag spasmed, dropped to the ground with a wet organic thud, and started screaming. Help me? Oh God, please help me. I screamed and jumped back. The bag writhed on the floor as whoever was inside it strained against the thick plastic. It cried out again in panic. God, please, let me out. I can't breathe. My heart was pounding. With shaking fingers, I reached for the bag to tear it open and free the person trapped inside. I grabbed at the plastic and froze. Rule number 8. The thing in the bag screamed in pain and fear. Is anyone there? Please, you have to help me. It started sobbing, the plastic shaking and curling in on itself. A chill ran down my back. This thing sounded human. It sounded as if it was in pain. It sounded real. But this place had taught me not to believe anything I heard or saw. Cautiously, I took hold of the bag. A hand shot out of the writhing mass and grabbed my arm. I yelled and stumbled back, breaking the thing's grip. Help me. You have to help me. I can't move. I can't breathe. I can't. The arm had been real enough. I could still feel its grip where it had caught me. The arm had been human-sized, but no human could have fit into that bag. I grabbed the twisted, amorphous mass. The hands grabbed at me through the plastic as it screamed for help into my face. Staggering with its weight, I lurched over to the garbage chute and dropped it over the edge. It caught onto the edge with its hands. Please, please, it whimpered. I can't go back. Please, don't. I brought the lid of the chute down on its fingers. It screamed, slid down the chute, and clawed at the sides as it disappeared into the dark and went silent. Rule number 9. If anyone exits room 3 during a show, do whatever they ask. Inform the manager immediately. For all the wrong reasons, this story isn't like the others I've told. This story will be different, and I'm not sure I like that. I'm not sure where it will lead me in the cinema, because this story happened yesterday. Even though David's warm to me in the time I've been working here, I think he might even trust me. He hasn't said anything about room 3. To be fair, I've been too afraid to ask. So rule number 9 has always been a source of mystery and no small amount of apprehension. No one I asked could even remember a time when they would have to obey it. Strange though it may seem, no one had ever exited room 3 during a projection, at least not in the years I've worked here. No one could remember David ever explaining the command or even talking about it. Rule number 9 was as big a mystery as the room it concerned. So nothing could have prepared me for yesterday when the door opened and a smartly dressed man walked out of room 3. I froze in my tracks. No amount of experience in this job could have prepared me for that. He walked over to me as I stood, staring in amazement and fear. "Good evening, sir," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, a blank slate. But unlike the thing from rule number 4, It was unmistakably human. Oh, good evening, I stammered finally. The man smiled in slight amusement. I wish to speak to the manager. Shit, right. Right this way, sir, I replied, trying to fake a calm I didn't feel. I wish I could have told the thing to stay, that I could have warned David. But it was as if my brain was in ice, sluggish and unresponsive. We walked over to the office and entered. I didn't even have time to talk. David looked up, saw the man, and went a sickly pale. Rule number 9, Sean. Yes, leave us. Please wait for me outside. I obeyed. Nothing could have made me remain in that room. Absolutely nothing. I exited into the lobby and waited. Time went by. I could hear the murmur of conversation from inside the office. Occasionally David's voice would rise in volume, and I swear that at one point I heard him weeping. It was half an hour until David opened the door and walked out. He was even paler than before, like all the blood had left. His hands shook very slightly, but I noticed. In the second before he closed the door, I could see the room behind him. It was empty. The man had gone. David? I asked cautiously, not knowing what to say. Is everything? What happened? David fixed his eyes on me. They were red-rimmed and bloodshot. Go home, Sean. Rest. Sleep. Prepare. Why? Prepare for what? We're going to break rules 10 and 11 tomorrow. Walking to work yesterday was the hardest thing I've ever done. Anticipation and fear mixed within me in equal measure. David's recommendation to rest and sleep had proven to be impossible to obey, and I had spent the whole night dreading what would come in the morning. When I came to work, I found the cinema empty. A sign at the entrance announced, closed temporarily due to equipment malfunction. David was already there. He sat in his unlit office, staring at the wall in silence. I walked in and stood at the door. I didn't have the courage to interrupt his thoughts. Eventually, he looked up. Sean, he said, his voice hollow. I'm sorry, my mind was somewhere else. He got up and walked over to me. You said we were going to break rules today, I said. Yes, rules 10 and 11. Rule number 10, if you find a book bound in black leather on the premises, do not open it. Rule number 10, the black book, as we like to call it. You'd see it at pretty much every shift, and overcoming the need to open, it was one of the first things you learned to do on the job. No one knew what was inside its yellowed ancient pages. It moved and shifted. Mysteriously, you'd see it in the corner of the garbage room, propped up invitingly in the corner. You'd walk over to a room or to the office, only to see it first on the ground in the lobby, and then in the office itself, lying on David's table, as if it had always been there. We'd never even seen David open it. It seemed I was going to see that now. It took us an unusually long time to find the book. Searching first the office and the lobby and the rooms, we then returned in defeat, only to find it sitting on one of David's filing cabinets. He snorted derisively and went to pick it up. Its ancient-looking pages, yellow by time, crackled as he opened it cautiously. From where I was standing, I couldn't see the words within, and moved to look at them over his shoulder. David slammed the covers closed. Not yet, Sean. So, my temper flared. David, I don't know anything about what's going on. I don't know what we're here to do today, or why we're breaking 2 of our rules. I don't expect you to tell me everything, but you've got to give me something. My anger receded as quickly as it had risen. I realized this was, despite everything, my employer. David smiled wryly. There was a second silence. You're right, Sean. You deserve to know something. I'm sorry. After 15 years in this job, you begin to get used to not telling anyone more than they need to know. 13 years ago, I made a mistake, Sean. Room 3 tricked me by using my affection for someone close to me. I opened the room and almost brought disaster on us all. It's ironic. Only the sacrifice of the person I thought I was saving helped delay disaster. Delay? Yes, Sean. We borrowed time yesterday. That time ran out. Unless we act, Room 3 won't need anyone to open it anymore. It will escape. By itself. And I can't allow that. And the book. What is it? I guess you could call it a manual of sorts. The rules of the cinema are all in there. He looked down onto the pages again. I could tell his impromptu informational talk was over. I could be happy for even the little I had gotten. David turned some pages, scanning their contents, before pointing at a piece of the page and smiling to himself. Sean, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room for a while. Just for a while. This shouldn't take long. I hesitated, but obeyed. Standing in front of the room, I could see David's shadow on the drawn blinds of his office window as he moved around. Suddenly, another shadow sprang up from behind him. They walked around until they stood face to face. Another joined it, and then another. Muted voices reached me. David sounded resolute and determined. The answering voices, many talking over each other at one time, were sharp but barely heard whispers, like the drawing of a knife across skin. The shadows gathered around David. He stood unmoving, his hands falling to his sides. The shadows leapt. They slid, merging with David's, and disappeared. Not waiting for a command, I ran into the office. I crashed through the door. David stood at his table, leaning on it tiredly and gasping for air, but he was unharmed. What the hell just happened? I asked. What the hell were those things? David chuckled to himself. I guess you could call them messengers or taskmasters. Could you please not talk in riddles for once, David? I said, exasperated that even now I was being kept on a need-to-know basis. I called out to something that shouldn't be called Sean. But this is a trying day, and desperate times call for desperate measures. Let's go. It should be arriving soon enough, and I'd hate to keep it waiting. He walked past me, still carrying the black book. After a second, I followed in mute frustration. Opening the door to the office, I saw what he had been talking about. The lady in black. If a woman in a black dress offers you a drink, do not accept. A woman stood before us. She was tall, taller than either of us, and her pale face contrasted with her deep dark hair. She wore a flowing midnight black dress. In her hands was a carved wooden goblet. I had encountered the lady in black before. She walked around the cinema often, stopping ushers every now and then to offer them a drink from her goblet. The liquid within was translucent and looked for all purposes like clear water. Somehow, I always doubted it was anything that harmless. Thankfully, she never forces a drink on us, making her one of the least dangerous things you could encounter here. When you refused, she would nod silently, understandingly, and move on. Now she was here. Will you accept my chalice? She said, almost whispering. Her voice was faint and unfathomably sad. I refused. It was almost muscle memory at this point, honed by dozens of encounters with her. But my words stuck in my throat when I realized she wasn't looking at me. She was talking to David. He was quiet for a second. I will, he answered finally. David, what are you? I began in confusion and panic. He cut me off. This has to be done, Sean. There's no other way we can stop what's coming. He turned back to the lady in black. It has been so long. She smiled faintly and passed him the cup. Drink. David took the chalice. He hesitated for a moment, wavering. His face hardened suddenly. He drank the cup quickly. Then he gasped, stumbled, and dropped it to the ground with a thud. He leaned on me heavily, and I almost fell over under his sudden weight. His face was a sickly pale. He coughed, and specks of red fell to the floor. You have paid the price, the lady whispered. I have, David replied, shaking with more bloody coughs. Now for your side of the bargain. Indeed. What is it you seek? She smiled sadly. I seek a way to halt room 3 from breaking free. David was choosing his words carefully. He only had one shot at this, I realized. The lady frowned. You will not like the answer, child, she whispered. Are you sure this is what you wish to know? I am sure, damn you, David whispered through clenched teeth. A thin red trail ran down the corner of his mouth. Tell me, the lady leaned forward to his ear. She whispered to him, words I hope I never have to hear. Then she straightened her back again. The bargain is complete. Farewell, David. She turned and walked away from us as if nothing had happened. She rounded a corner. Somehow I knew she wouldn't be there if I looked. David turned to me. Blood was now dripping from the corner of his eyes, too. The black book fell from his fingers. "David, what did you do? What's happening?" I stammered. "What did she tell you?" I had to lean forward to hear his reply, his voice weakening with every word. Go to the projection booth, Sean. Turn on all the projectors. Do it now. Quick." The command in his tone was absolute. I ran for the projection booth. I swiftly flipped every switch, moving from projector to projector. The whir of machinery filled the air. Empty though it was, there was now a show in every room of the cinema. I realized what David was doing. Too late, I realized. I sprinted back to the lobby, taking the stairs from booth 3 at a time. I had to be on time. I had to. He wasn't in the front of the office anymore. The black book lay open from when it had fallen to the ground, the only indicator he had ever even stood there. I ran over to it and looked around the lobby. Of course, David stood before room 3. His hand was on the handle. He looked back at me, blood in his eyes. "David, don't," I screamed. 13 years, Sean. Use them well, he called out to me. He smiled. Then he opened the door. The darkness on the other side was absolute. A light stopped the second it hit the door frame. David didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and closed the door behind him. I stood frozen. He was gone. There was a rumble, and the earth shook. The door to room 3 rattled in its frame as whatever was inside strained at the walls, eager to escape. But it struggled in vain. Whatever David had done, whatever his sacrifice had achieved, it had robbed room 3, bound it again, bought more time. The rumbling subsided. The door stopped shaking. There was silence. A rustle of pages below drew my gaze. I looked down at the book at my feet. It was open and on the last page. There was only one sentence on it, written in black ink. "There must always be a manager.